Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel, and your fixture for 2025 is officially out. We are a bit over 100 days away from the start of your fantasy football season, and yet again, the fixture has dished up for us in the fantasy football community a few headaches, a few surprises, and ultimately, it's going to create a great and exciting challenge for us about how we navigate the games this upcoming season. There's some newness that we've got to navigate our way through. There's some familiar faces, whether they're friends or foes, you be the judge. And throughout this episode, we're going to look through what the AFL fixture means for SuperCoach, for AFL Fantasy, for Dream Team, and for keeper coaches in 2025. Well, Thursday Night Footy, right off the top, we got to talk about that. We need to talk about opening rounds, the buys, and then wrap it up together for what it means for us for the relevant players and the structures and strategies we might be considering. But right out of the gate, as important as the fixture is and the potential moves this might have on us, while we understand opening round and the buys a little bit more than we did 12 months ago, the fixture's only a piece of the puzzle. Yes, it informs players that we might consider that have a hot stretch, that favourable fixtures, favourable matchups. Yes, we need to know for our upgrade cadence what the fixture looks like. But the reality is it's just a piece of the puzzle. We're waiting for positions to drop, which will happen just after the draft. We're waiting for the prices. We're looking to see what the discounts are and any other potential new variables in either the volume of trades or the way we handle the game for the unique formats to drop our way. All of these pieces of the puzzle ultimately help us navigate our way through how we should, for classic coaches, build our starting squad structures. And for draft coaches, especially if you're using Keeper, which is our preferred platform of choice, they do give you a little bit of customization. Thursday Night Footy, we got to talk about that. It'll be there every single round of the year, but we only know the first 16 weeks. The latter few rounds will be adjusted politely. Prime time will be based on how you're performing. But Thursday Night Footy, we're going to see a lot of Essendon. Does that bump up a Zach Merritt in the relevance conversation? I'll hear that. Brisbane, Geelong also getting a lot of games on Thursday, while Collingwood, Carlton, Brisbane, we see them a lot on Friday night football, as well as some Hawthorn and some Essendon matches through there. So we are seeing a trend of some clubs that right there, if you're playing classic or looking to loophole in draft, it does create some players that, if you've got the vice captaincy consideration, it might bump them up in your elevations and estimations just that little bit more. For example, Zach Merritt, uber consistent and reliable. I think since like 2016, he's just been probably the most durable and safest premium midfielder we've had rolling around. Just Mr. 105, 115 in that sort of range right throughout the better part of a decade. Does this just put even greater certainty in with so many early Essendon games, the VC option? Or are you not too worried by that? Are you looking at maybe some Sunday matchups and seeing, okay, who are the teams that play a lot of Sunday games? And historically, it's, and I use this term loosely, interstate teams from outside of Victoria that have a lot of frequency of games for a number of reasons. Travel is a component to it, but Brisbane, the Eagles, the Giants, I think, all have 5 games on a Sunday. The Eagles, Melbourne, all really high up there as well. So these are teams that maybe you're looking as a safety net captaincy option. So Neils, Dunkley's. Gosh, if you're looking for an Eagle to be a safety net captain, you're in a world of trouble. But even Fremantle with the likes of Brayshaw, Sarong, do they become a little bit more favourable to you because of how many later and Sunday games they have? This is the beauty of the fixture, is it does allow some strategic elements about how we go into it. So yes, there's a bunch of elements we can extract from Sunday games. These Sunday games are historically clubs we really target for our R3 to loophole our captaincy option. So are you looking yet again for a Harry Barnett, for example, at West Coast? You think he's going to be your guy, or one of the Giants or Lions kind of depth ruck options? These are generally the approaches that we've used, and those are probably the teams we'll be looking to once again. Opening round has landed for us. 8 teams will play. What we know about opening round this year is identical to last year, unless one of the formats want to throw a curveball our way. I'm fully expecting them to embrace opening round 25 as they did in 2024, meaning the games, while their scoring will count to their overall price movements, they will not impact their starting price. So if they play an opening round and in round 1 for AFL Fantasy, they'll have a double price movement, while everyone else that doesn't play will just have the one. While for SuperCoach and Dream Team that work on a 3-game pricing cycle, they'll basically have a 2-for-1 movement in the sense of they'll get to the end of round 1 and they'll be on the bubble should they have had a movement and played in opening round and round 1. So either a higher or a lower break even, depending on the scope and style of player we're looking at. So we know how to handle opening round a little bit more, whether it be overtly reactionary or whether we need to take things with a grain of salt. Those that jumped off a Max Gawn because of a disappointing opening round, well, that didn't work out for you, especially if you went all the way down to a Brodie Grundy and it affected your strategy and your cycle. Grundy was fine, but he was no Max Gawn to start the season. So 8 teams are playing, a couple of different ones for us. We'll see Hawthorn pop into the mix through there. We'll see Geelong pop into the mix through there. We'll see Essendon pop. So we'll see a few different teams. And as a result, the teams that play in opening round will have an earlier bye. They'll be, instead of spread over 4 weeks, they'll be kind of condensed into 3 so that everyone will play round 1 and then rounds 2, 3, and 4. We will see these 8 teams have a bye. But then after gather round, which is round 5, by the end of that, we'll have all played equal number of games and we'll get a little bit of an early line of sight of what it means. So what does it mean for us from a fantasy football perspective? Well, it means in round 2, we're going to be without Suns and Giants players. Pretty close to what we were looking at last year as well. Brisbane was sitting into that mixture. But do you remember the early day challenges you had last year? It was, do we start with Flanders? Do we not? Do we start with Neil? How do we manage a Kitty Coleman? We're going to have the same sort of conversations and thought processes, but we're going to be without those 2 teams. I think the most difficult to navigate is going to be round 3, not just because we have 4 teams on the bye, but we've got some really potentially highly relevant players. We have the Lions, we have the Magpies, we have the Cats, and we have the Swans. Players such as Goulden, as Neil, as Dunkley, as Will Ashcroft as a breakout candidate, as Nick Dacos, Jordan De Goey in that kind of value scope space. Bailey Smith, in many people's eyes, should he maintain forward eligibility, which I think he does. Can we start him now, let alone a Max Holmes and a bunch of others we could consider? Round 3 does look like the pivoting pain point. And then in round 4, you've got Essendon and Hawthorn both missing in that week. Like I said, we all play round 5, and then we're back on until our next block of buys in round 12. It's an interesting kind of 3-week cycle for us there, isn't it? I think if we look back at some of the reflections of how we handled opening round and teams with these early season buys, a lot of the community was very risk averse to paying up for any of the top end players. And I think we learned some lessons that you can still dip into the well here. Yeah, you've got to be a little bit conscious of your strategy, but there were some players that were significantly important. If you avoided because of the early buys, that hurt you. If you didn't have a Gawn or a Heaney inside those early days that had a early buy, man, you were playing catch up a little bit, weren't you? If you started with a Lockie Whitfield and held him through, I think that still felt like a really valuable movement. And while we half knocked the Brodie Grundy selection, he was fine if you started with him, let alone if you went a Dane Zorko and got ahead of the pack with his breakout career best season. So to me, I think we need to take some of the lessons we learned from 2024, apply them to 2025, should we not have any changes. And the changes are, well, it was best 18, but no additional trades granted to us. Now, super coaches and dream teamers, you could use a boost in that time, but there was no additional trades available to us like there is in the mid-season and the mid-portion buys. So what were the lessons or reflections you had? If you're watching this, which is the only way you're checking this episode out, by the way, comment below. What were the things you learnt from opening round last year, and how are you going to be able to apply them to 2025? 5. For me, the big thing I'm taking away is I'm not being so careful and being a little bit more strategic around how I approach that period of time and not being so hesitant to go near a bunch of different players. Yes, you got hurt a little bit by some of the names, but politely, the Heenies, the Gorns, the Grundys, Whitfield, even a Tom Green, if you had any of those guys and were protected with a decent cow scoring or some good squad depth, depending on if you went a little bit more mid-price happy, kind of got away with it. And you got a top end and a top line option. So I don't think you should be as risk averse as you were last year, but comment below and let us know. The other big thing that's happening to us this year from a structural perspective that is a little bit different is an even longer mid-season block. Historically, we do spend a month of best 18 in the middle of the year. Sometimes it had been 3 weeks, but more recently it had been closer to a whole month of best 18s. We're granted an additional trade in the formats of up to 3, while SuperCoach and Dream Teamers, if you've got any boosts left by then, you can use right up to 4 trades per week. But this year's mid-season buys are looking a little bit different because we are now heading to an additional week of mid-season buys. They start at round 12 and they end at round 16. So in round 12, you've got Carlton, North, Port Adelaide, and the Bulldogs. None of those teams sit in the opening round block of buys, so that's positive. Then round 13, you've got Fremantle and St Kilda. We'll come back to that buy round in a second. Round 14, 15, and 16. We do start to see some of the teams that had an early buy now appear again in Gold Coast, Collingwood, Richmond, and Sydney. So 3 of those early teams sitting in there have the quote-unquote double buy before some teams have even had one, such as an Adelaide. Round 15, back to the 2 teams that haven't had one yet. Oh, there's 3 if I'm being honest. It's West Coast, it's Melbourne, it's Adelaide, who I've alluded to, and the Hawks. And then round 16, you've got the Lions, you've got the Cats, you've got the Bombers, and you're back with the Giants. So 5 blocks of buy rounds. We'll talk about what my thoughts are around this and how many multi-buy rounds there are. But if we make the assumption of what it is we will have 3 weeks in the first 4 rounds of 2025 where we're in best 18, and then 5 weeks in the middle portion of the season, what is traditionally viewed as Upgrade City, are also in best 18. What does it mean for us with players that are in this middle block? Well, I think coaches will significantly do what they do most years, which is target Fremantle and St Kilda in that round 13. Well, I don't think it's defining the players we kind of value. It does up their relevance, maybe just a notch or 2. So players like Marshall, Wanganeen Millera, McRae, Steele, Sinclair, all sit into that space. Philippou, another, gradually a little bit more increase in relevance. Well, for Fremantle, it's Darcy, it's Young, it's Brayshaw, it's Sarong, Clark, Ryan, all these guys. Again, it's not drastic, but it's enough that structurally about how you build your team, you've got that first 12 weeks of the season where it's, are they playing every week? Should they be available? Easiest buy to navigate of the season. And then away we go from the back end of the year. So I can see coaches prioritizing just that little bit more, maybe being the deciding power of difference between, do I like Brayshaw or do I like X? If you rank them similarly, Brayshaw might just get the tip, for example, of the balance of power because of that. So a number of teams all sitting in that space. But really, for me, we know how to handle this period really, really easily. We know what it means, and that we start looking at Carlton, North, Port, Western Bulldogs players at round 13 and upgrading players off their bye. This is base level fantasy upgrade trades and how we handle that. What my thoughts are around this is we have 8 weeks of the season. About 33% of the year is now in best 18. At the end of the 2024 season on this channel, I did a video specifically around AFL Fantasy. I think some of the parallels could approach the other formats as well, but it was about changes I'd love to see in the game. So much of the season now, a third of the year, is sitting in best 18 should nothing change from the formats. And I don't think it will, by the way. But my personal belief is I don't like this many rounds of best 18. Now, good coaches find their way through everything. And I think we need to embrace the challenges that come our way from a fantasy football perspective. So by no means am I being overtly critical to the formats in what they're doing or why they're doing it. I understand it. I understand losers' engagement from specifically casual coaches, Thursday night game. I get it. However, with the way the games were initially designed to be played, with the squads, with the salary cap, is a third of the season in best 18 really the best approach? I think there's two alternate scenarios that maybe would help us get through this a little bit more. I don't mind either of them. Now, to be clear, I'm still playing the games, still love my fantasy footy, and I'm not being overtly critical. I'm just saying, is it really the best way to play SuperCoach, Dream Team, and AFL Fantasy? I think there's two outcomes we could look at. One of them, which is something I suggested in the video that I alluded to just before, is just do away with best 18s altogether. We've got an abundance of trades. We've got an abundance of depth in our benches. Let's just go best 22 every single week. And in those more challenging weeks where 4 teams are missing, we just work our way through it. Let's not protect the community and protect ourselves with, oh no, I've only got 21 on field this week. No, this is the strategy that can come our way, and it changes the dynamic to now all of a sudden there's a new twist that comes in. To me, I quite like that and probably prefer that of these two scenarios I'm pitching, but I just get rid of best 18 altogether. I like the challenge of that. I just go for it. The other approach of way you could do it, again, with so much of the season best 18 now, is just go all in on that and make our, instead of 22 on field points count, just make it 18. Slip down a defender, a mid, a ruck, and a forward spot. Give it a 5-7-1-5. Feels a little drafty, doesn't it? And slot down this to 26 players in our starting squads and make us deal with that. And it's best 18 year round and best 18 on field players. And it is kind of like the AFL. We've only got 18 on field at that time. I don't hate that either. As I said, I don't think any of the formats are changing, but my personal perspective is I think with so much now of the season, quote unquote, compromised with best 18s, I understand why it was introduced, but I think the community, both the casual and the more serious coach, much more matured in how they know how to navigate their way through the season. I think we could look at something a little bit differently, but that's just my personal perspective. And that's what I think we could do, is one of those two things. Either way, the fixture becomes a really important piece for us this year, doesn't it? Whether we're getting best 18s or not, which again, I think we are. The players we look at, that do they rule themselves in or out due to opening round and those early buys? Does that change our upgrade cadence and structure due to who has the more Sunday games, the early start, who's got favourable early fixtures, let alone what it means for us through those mid-season buys? As I said right at the top of the episode, the fixture is a critical piece for classic coaches with our structures and strategies for how we build our starting squad. Less so for draft, and I will talk about draft in a moment, but it's not the most important piece of the puzzle. You've got to add positions. This video's dropped about a week before the AFL draft, a little bit less than that. We historically are around about 7 days, either side, maybe a handful of days, from the positions dropping. Last year, it was within a week. Previous years, it's been up to 2 weeks. So, about 7 days it takes for the positions to drop. Champion data, allocate that to the formats, and they're pretty quick these days, the formats, at leaking those to us. So we're probably under 2 weeks from day of this episode being released from the positions being out. That's a critical piece for us. Another 2 weeks or so past the positions, the prices drop. And then depending on the format you play, the format's open, especially if you've got some form of assistant coach or gold subscription, then you can get in early to that kind of feature. So we're not too far away from not just some of the pieces of the puzzle, but all of them being really well known for classic owners. For draft, what does this mean? Well, it means the beauty of a platform, if you were to play on Keeper, is it now gives you as commissioner in your leagues options. They've got some great customizations that are in motion and that are being released shortly that is going to help you give yourself some options of how you handle these multiple buys, because it's hard to draft with so many. It'll give you all the customizations you want. You're going to take an average. You're going to lose a player. You're going to do a few options. You're going to expand squads. The beauty of Keeper, and one of the things I love about it most, is it gives you so much customization that you can do the thing that is right for your unique draft league. Whether it's a Keeper, a dynasty, or a single season, Keeper is definitely the platform I'd be drafting on in 2025. But that's some of my thoughts about what the fixture means. Do you agree or disagree? You can comment below. Give me your first thoughts on what the AFL fixture for the 2025 season means for us in the fantasy football community. If you're enjoying this video and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do so. Turn the notifications on so that as soon as a new episode drops, we got you covered. And as soon as the positions are live, we'll be sharing those here on the channel. Our team reveals, our early team reveals will drop the moments that the formats are open. And then don't forget, January is when we start the 50 most relevant. A player a day, looking at who I believe are the most relevant players across SuperCoach, Dream Team, AFL Fantasy, and we even give you a draft Keeper perspective on them as well. So plenty of stuff and plenty of reasons to stay subscribed and stay looking on your device for content coming from the Coaches Panel. Hey, thanks so much for watching this. If you like what you've got from the Coaches Panel on this episode, make sure you subscribe for the preseason that is fast approaching. Join our Patreon, get yourself some Coaches Panel merch, and get in touch with us across social media. All the details are in the description of this episode. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll be back talking more things Fantasy Footy 2025 with you very, very soon.